Victoria Reed's fingers trembled slightly as she adjusted the sleeves of her black dress. The backstage area of the Golden Crown Hotel's grand ballroom felt suffocating despite its spaciousness. Through a gap in the heavy velvet curtains, she could see the glittering crowd, business tycoons, celebrities, and the who's who of the city, all gathered for tech millionaire Ethan Blackwood's charity gala. 5 minutes. "Miss Reed," the event coordinator whispered, clipboard clutched to her chest. "Mr. Blackwood is very particular about timing." Victoria nodded, trying to quiet the storm in her stomach. 6 months ago, she had been playing at small coffee shops and teaching piano to uninterested children. Now she was about to perform for some of the wealthiest people in the country. One good impression could change everything. The coordinator disappeared, leaving Victoria alone with the magnificent grand piano waiting on stage. She closed her eyes, remembering her mother's words. "Music isn't just notes. Vicky, it's your heart speaking through your fingertips." Her mother had cleaned houses for the rich to pay for Victoria's piano lessons. The irony wasn't lost on her that tonight she'd be playing for people who probably employed cleaners just like her mother had been. The lights dimmed, and Victoria heard her name announced. Walking onto the stage, the spotlight felt both blinding and revealing. She settled at the piano bench, took a deep breath, and began to play. She'd chosen Chopin, technically challenging but accessible enough for this crowd. As her fingers danced across the keys, she could sense the audience's initial chatter fading into attentive silence. For 10 minutes, she was no longer the girl from the East Side whose mother had scrubbed floors. She was just music. When she finished, applause rippled through the room, polite, appreciative, but not overwhelming. Victoria stood and bowed, scanning the faces until she found him. Ethan Blackwood sat at the central table, clapping lazily with one hand while the other held a crystal glass of amber liquid. Even from a distance, his eyes seemed to evaluate her like she was a business proposition. As Victoria made her way off stage, the event coordinator intercepted her with a fixed smile. "Mr. Blackwood would like you to join his table." Victoria's heart jumped. This was exactly the kind of opportunity she'd hoped for. Perhaps a regular gig at his famous house parties, or a recommendation to his influential friends. The coordinator led her through the maze of tables. Conversations paused briefly as she passed, curious eyes following her movement before returning to champagne glasses and practiced laughter. Ethan Blackwood stood as she approached. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair cut precisely and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Everything about him seemed calculated, from his perfectly tailored suit to the casual way he held himself, as though the world naturally arranged itself around him. "Miss Reed," he said, his voice carrying that distinctive tone of someone who rarely heard the word no. "Your playing was technically proficient." Victoria's smile froze. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Please sit." He gestured to an empty chair beside him. The other guests at the table, 3 men and 2 women dressed in outfits that probably cost more than Victoria's yearly rent, watched with curious detachment. A server immediately appeared with champagne for Victoria. She took a small sip, wishing she could down it all at once. "I understand you studied at the City Conservatory," Ethan said, leaning back in his chair. "Yes, on scholarship." He swirled his drink. "And now you play at various venues around town?" The way he said it made her freelance work sound like begging on street corners. Victoria straightened her spine. "I maintain a diverse performance schedule, while also teaching talented students." A woman across the table, all blonde hair and diamonds, laughed softly. How diplomatic. Ethan's lips curved upward. "Tell me, Miss Reed, do you enjoy playing such safe selections?" Victoria blinked. "Chopin is hardly safe. The piece I played requires significant technical—" Yes, Ethan waved his hand dismissively. "But anyone with 10 years of lessons could play it. I was hoping for something more unexpected from someone your age." Heat crawled up Victoria's neck. "Perhaps if you specified what you'd prefer to hear—" "That's just it," Ethan interrupted, leaning forward now. "I don't want to specify. I want to be surprised. Moved." "When was the last time your playing actually moved someone, Miss Reed?" The table had gone quiet. Even the surrounding tables seemed to sense the tension and had lowered their voices. "Music affects different people in different ways, Mr. Blackwood," Victoria said carefully. "What moves one person might not touch another." Diplomatic again. Ethan chuckled, glancing at his friends. But you're avoiding my question. Victoria set down her glass. I believe my music speaks for itself. Does it? Ethan raised an eyebrow. Because what I heard was a woman who plays all the right notes but says nothing with them. The words stung like a physical slap. Victoria had heard criticism before but never delivered with such casual cruelty. Ethan seemed to enjoy her discomfort. He leaned back, addressing his friends now. You know what I think? I think true musical genius is nearly extinct. Everyone plays the same pieces the same way, claiming it's interpretation when really it's just imitation. Not everyone has your refined taste. Darling, said the blonde woman, her tone suggesting this was a familiar conversation. Clearly, Ethan replied. He turned back to Victoria. Would you like to know what I think would be truly extraordinary, Miss Reed? Victoria wasn't sure she did, but she nodded anyway. If you could play something, anything, that genuinely surprised me, that made me feel something I wasn't expecting to feel. He paused, his eyes narrowing with amusement. I'd marry you on the spot. The table erupted in laughter. Victoria sat frozen as Ethan raised his glass in a mock toast. That's how confident I am that it won't happen, he continued, his voice carrying over the laughter. Play and I'll wed you. There's an offer for a struggling artist. Victoria stood so abruptly that her chair nearly toppled backward. Thank you for the champagne, Mr. Blackwood, she said, her voice tight. And for the interesting proposition. She turned to leave, desperately hoping she wouldn't trip or show any sign of how badly her hands were shaking. No need to rush off, Ethan called after her. We're just having a bit of fun. Victoria didn't turn back. She made her way through the ballroom, smiling stiffly at anyone who caught her eye, until she reached the service hallway that led to the back entrance. Only then did she let her shoulders slump, pressing her palm against the cool wall for support. Breathe, she whispered to herself. Just breathe. You okay, miss? Victoria startled. A woman stood a few feet away, holding a trash bag in one hand and looking at Victoria with concern. She wore the hotel's cleaning staff uniform, a gray dress with a white collar, and had her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She was older than Victoria, perhaps in her 40s, with lines around her eyes that suggested both laughter and hardship. I'm fine, Victoria said automatically, then sighed. No, actually, I'm not, but I will be. The woman set down her trash bag. Those fancy parties can be tough. I've cleaned up after enough of them to know. Victoria smiled weakly. It's not the party. It's just, have you ever had someone make you feel like everything you've worked for is worthless? The woman's eyes softened. More times than I can count. Something in her calm acceptance made Victoria's eyes sting with unexpected tears. She blinked them back furiously. I'm Rosa, the woman said, offering a hand that was rough from work but surprisingly strong. Victoria, you're the piano player, yes? I heard a little before I had to get back to work. It was beautiful. Victoria laughed bitterly. Not according to Mr. Blackwood. Rosa's expression shifted slightly. Ah, him. You know him. I clean his office in this hotel twice a week. He never sees me, but I see him. She shrugged. Men like that, they think money gives them the right to judge everything. But money can't buy what really matters. Victoria wiped quickly at a tear that had escaped. Unfortunately, money does buy food and rent. Rosa studied her for a moment. What did he say to upset you so much? Victoria hesitated, then found herself telling this stranger about Ethan's cruel assessment and ridiculous proposal. As she spoke, her humiliation turned to anger. He made me feel like I was nothing. Like my years of practice and study were just a parlor trick. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Then she said, when I was young in my country, my grandmother told me something I never forgot. She said, when people show you who they are, believe them the first time. What does that mean? It means Mr. Blackwood showed you he's a man who uses his power to make others feel small. That's about him, not about your music. Rosa picked up her trash bag again. The question is, what will you do now? Victoria considered this. What would she do? Slink away and lick her wounds? Find another gig and pretend tonight never happened? Before she could answer, the service door opened and the event coordinator appeared, looking flustered. There you are. Mr. Blackwood's assistant is looking for you. Apparently, Mr. Blackwood wants to offer you a position as the resident musician at his estate for the summer. She lowered her voice. The pay is exceptional. Victoria stared at her in disbelief. After what just happened, The coordinator looked confused. Is there a problem? Victoria glanced at Rosa, who raised her eyebrows slightly but said nothing. I need to think about it, Victoria said finally. The coordinator looked scandalized. You want to think about it? Do you know how many musicians would kill for this opportunity? I'm sure there are many, Victoria said. Please tell Mr. Blackwood's assistant I'll be in touch tomorrow with my decision. After the coordinator left, muttering about ungrateful artists, Victoria turned back to Rosa. What would you do? She asked. Rosa adjusted her uniform. I can't tell you that, but I will say this. Sometimes the best response to a challenge isn't walking away. Sometimes it's showing up and changing the rules of the game. Victoria considered this, something stirring inside her that felt like determination. I should let you get back to work, she said. Rosa nodded. Good luck, Victoria. Whatever you decide. As Rosa continued down the hallway, Victoria stood alone, the sounds of the gala a distant murmur. Ethan Blackwood thought he could dismiss her talent with a cruel joke. But perhaps there was another way to look at his challenge. Not as an insult, but as an opportunity. Play something that would move him? Make him feel something unexpected? Victoria smiled slowly, an idea taking shape. Maybe it was time to stop playing by other people's rules. Maybe it was time to create her own music. Victoria stood at the gates of Ethan Blackwood's estate, her old car parked behind her, looking embarrassingly out of place among the manicured gardens and stone fountains. After a sleepless night and a long conversation with her roommate, she had called the number on the business card the coordinator had pressed into her hand. One summer, she had told Ethan's assistant, a brisk woman named Patricia, I'll play for 3 months and I want everything in writing. Now, as the gate swung open automatically, Victoria questioned her decision for the 100th time. Was she really going to work for a man who had publicly humiliated her? But the alternative, continuing to scrape by with coffee shop gigs and teaching piano to bored children, wasn't moving her career forward. A security guard met her at the circular driveway. Miss Reed, follow me, please. The house was exactly what Victoria had expected. Modern, massive, and cold despite the summer heat. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the ocean. Minimalist furniture dotted the open-concept rooms, and everything was white, gray, or glass. It looked like a magazine spread rather than a home. Mr. Blackwood has set up a studio for you, the guard explained, leading her down a hallway. He's in Tokyo until tomorrow, but he left instructions. Victoria felt a mix of relief and disappointment. Part of her had wanted to face Ethan immediately, to show him she wasn't intimidated. Another part was grateful for the reprieve. The music studio made her breath catch. It was a large room with acoustic panels on the walls, a recording setup in one corner, and in the center, a gorgeous Steinway grand piano that must have cost more than Victoria would earn in a decade. Your living quarters are through that door, the guard pointed. Kitchen staff will bring meals, or you can use the small kitchenette in your suite. Mr. Blackwood prefers his artists to focus on their work. His artists, like she was part of some collection. Patricia will email you the schedule. Mr. Blackwood often hosts small gatherings in the evenings, and you'll be expected to provide background music. During the day, your time is your own for practice. After the guard left, Victoria approached the piano slowly, almost reverently. She ran her fingers over the keys without pressing down, admiring the craftsmanship. Whatever else she thought of Ethan Blackwood, he hadn't skimped on the instrument. She sat on the bench and began to play. Just scales at first, then a piece she knew by heart, letting the magnificent acoustics of the room wash over her. The sound was so pure it almost brought tears to her eyes. For the next few hours, Victoria explored the studio, unpacked her small suitcase in the adjoining suite, and tried to settle her nerves by playing. By evening, her shoulders had relaxed, and she was beginning to think this arrangement might work after all, until Patricia called. Mr. Blackwood's plans have changed. He's arriving tonight and hosting an impromptu dinner for some Japanese investors. Be ready to play at 8. Formal attire. Victoria glanced at the clock. It was already 6. I didn't bring formal attire, she said. I wasn't told. There's a closet in your suite with appropriate options, Patricia interrupted. Mr. Blackwood anticipated this need. Of course he did, Victoria thought bitterly after hanging up. He'd anticipated everything except asking if she was ready to perform on her first day. The closet contained several evening gowns in different sizes, all with tags still attached. Victoria chose the least revealing one. a simple black dress that fit surprisingly well. She didn't want to think about how Blackwood had guessed her size. At precisely 8 o'clock, Victoria was seated at the piano in the main living area. 6 Japanese businessmen and 2 women in sleek suits were arranged on the couches, drinks in hand. Ethan stood near the massive fireplace, talking animatedly. He looked different than he had at the gala, more relaxed in dark jeans and an expensive-looking button-down shirt, his hair slightly tousled as though he'd just stepped off his private jet, which Victoria realized he probably had. He noticed her and nodded once, barely acknowledging her presence before turning back to his guests. Victoria felt her face flush with annoyance. Fine, if she was just background music. That's what she'd provide. She began to play a classical piece that was pleasant but forgettable, exactly what was expected at such gatherings. As conversations continued around her, Victoria felt herself becoming what she had always feared: musical wallpaper. Talented enough to create a nice atmosphere, but not interesting enough to command attention. After an hour, her fingers moving mechanically through piece after piece while no one listened, Victoria decided to try something different. She transitioned smoothly into a modern composition with a subtle complexity that built slowly, adding her own improvisations. One of the Japanese women glanced over, her conversation pausing momentarily. Encouraged, Victoria let the music grow more daring, incorporating elements that didn't quite belong together but somehow worked. She sensed rather than saw Ethan approaching the piano. Without looking up, she could feel him watching her hands, evaluating. She refused to meet his eyes, focusing instead on the music, letting it become more personal, more raw. When she finished, there was a brief moment of silence before conversations resumed. Ethan leaned against the piano. "Interesting choice," he said. Victoria finally looked at him. "Just trying to keep things from getting stale. Is that what you think I want? Background music that's not stale?" His tone was impossible to read. "I don't know what you want, Mr. Blackwood. You haven't exactly been clear about your expectations." A flash of something. Surprise? Respect? Crossed his face before his expression settled back into cool amusement. "I expect excellence, Miss Reed, nothing more, nothing less. Excellence is subjective, not to me." He straightened. "My guests are leaving soon. After that, I'd like to discuss your schedule." The dinner party dispersed around 10, leaving Victoria alone with Ethan in the vast living room. He poured himself a whiskey and, without asking, a glass of wine for her. "Your playing tonight was competent," he said, handing her the wine. Victoria took it but didn't drink. "Is that your idea of a compliment?" Ethan smiled slightly. "It's my idea of honesty. You're technically skilled, obviously well-trained, but you're holding back. Holding back what? Whatever makes you different from every other pianist I could have hired." He sat in an armchair across from her. "Why did you take this job, Victoria?" "After our conversation at the gala, I half expected you to throw my offer back in my face." Victoria considered lying, then decided against it. "I need the money and the exposure." "Practical," he nodded. "But there's something else, isn't there?" She met his gaze steadily. "I want to prove you wrong." Ethan laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face. For a moment, Victoria caught a glimpse of someone younger, less cynical. "At least you're honest." "I try to be." "Then let me be honest too." He leaned forward. "I invited you here because I saw potential at the gala. Your playing was good, but safe. I want to know if there's more." "More what?" "More you. More emotion. More risk." He stood, suddenly restless. "Do you know how many perfect pianists there are in this world? Thousands. What separates the ones we remember from the ones we forget isn't technique. It's soul." Victoria felt a flicker of anger. "You don't know anything about my soul." "Exactly," Ethan said, pointing at her. "And after hearing you play multiple times, I still don't. That's the problem." The conversation was cut short by a staff member entering to clear glasses. Victoria used the interruption to escape to her suite, unsettled by Ethan's assessment, which hit too close to what her professors had sometimes said: technically flawless, emotionally reserved. The next morning, Victoria woke early and headed to the studio, determined to practice before Ethan was awake. To her surprise, the studio wasn't empty. Rosa, the cleaner from the hotel, was dusting the bookshelves. "Rosa?" Victoria said, stunned. Rosa turned, equally surprised. "Victoria!" What are you doing here? I took the job as Mr. Blackwood's resident musician. But what are you doing here? You work at the hotel, Rosa smiled. I work many places. Hotel 3 days, here 2 days, another house on weekends. Victoria shook her head, strangely pleased to see a familiar face. Small world. Very small, Rosa agreed. She finished dusting a shelf. So you decided to accept his challenge? Not exactly, Victoria said, sitting at the piano bench. I'm just doing a job. Rosa gave her a knowing look. If you say so. For the next hour, Victoria practiced while Rosa cleaned the studio. The older woman worked quietly, occasionally humming along with Victoria's playing. There was something comforting about her presence. When Rosa finished, she paused at the door. You play differently when you think no one is listening. Victoria's hand stilled on the keys. What do you mean? Just now, when you were lost in thought, you played with more. Rosa searched for the word. More truth. After Rosa left, Victoria sat motionless at the piano. Truth. Was that what was missing? She thought about Ethan's words from the night before, about soul and emotion and risk. She began to play again, a simple melody she had composed years ago but never developed. This time she tried to let go of the precision she had always valued, focusing instead on the feeling behind each note. It wasn't perfect, but it felt more authentic somehow. She was so absorbed that she didn't notice Ethan standing in the doorway until she finished. That wasn't on any program I've heard, he said. Victoria jumped slightly. It's nothing. Just something I wrote a long time ago. Play it again. It wasn't a request, but a command. Victoria bristled. I'd rather not. Ethan entered the room, his expression unreadable. Why not? It was the most honest thing I've heard you play. Because it's personal. Exactly. He sat in a chair near the piano. That's what I've been talking about, personal, real. Victoria felt exposed as though he had read her diary. I don't perform my own compositions. Why not? Because, she hesitated. Because they're not good enough. Ethan studied her. Says who? The question hung in the air between them. Victoria had no answer that didn't trace back to her own fear of rejection, of being truly seen and found wanting. Before she could respond, Ethan's phone rang. He checked it and stood. I have a call with Singapore. We'll continue this conversation later. At the door, he paused. Tonight's gathering starts at 7. Wear the blue dress. After he left, Victoria stared at the piano keys, thoughts swirling. She had come here to prove herself, to show Ethan Blackwood that she was more than he had assumed at their first meeting. But in doing so, she might have to risk showing parts of herself she had always kept hidden. The question was whether she was brave enough to try. 2 weeks passed in a blur of performances and practice. Victoria settled into a routine at Ethan's estate, playing for his frequent dinner parties and spending her days at the magnificent piano. The work wasn't difficult, but it left her feeling hollow. Night after night, she provided elegant background music while barely being noticed. During the days, she occasionally saw Ethan in passing. He would nod or ask a brief question about her needs, but never mentioned their conversation about her playing with more emotion. Victoria told herself she was relieved, yet part of her was disappointed. Had he already given up on whatever potential he claimed to see in her? The only bright spot in her week was when Rosa came to clean. Unlike the other staff who treated Victoria with polite distance, Rosa spoke to her like a real person, asking about her day and sharing small stories about her own life. My grandson started piano lessons, Rosa mentioned one morning while wiping down the bookshelves in the studio. He has good hands for it. Long fingers like yours. Victoria smiled, taking a break from practice. How old is he? 7, full of energy. Rosa's face softened with pride. His teacher says he has talent, but lessons are expensive. I could teach him, Victoria offered impulsively. For free, I mean. When I'm done here. Rosa shook her head. You are kind, but you have your own career to worry about. It's no trouble. Really? Victoria was surprised by how much she meant it. The thought of teaching a child who actually wanted to learn was appealing after her previous students who had been forced into lessons by ambitious parents. Rosa looked at her thoughtfully. Perhaps. Let me think about it. Later that afternoon, Victoria was alone in the studio, attempting to work on one of her old compositions. Every time she tried to develop it, she hit a wall. The notes were correct, but something was missing. Why did you stop? Victoria jumped. Rosa stood in the doorway with fresh towels. I didn't hear you come in, Victoria said, embarrassed. You were concentrating. Rosa set down the towels. That piece. You wrote it? Victoria nodded. Years ago. I'm trying to improve it, but it's not working. Rosa hesitated, then asked, May I? She gestured to the piano. Surprised, Victoria stood and moved aside. Rosa sat at the bench, her cleaning uniform looking out of place against the glossy black finish of the Steinway. She positioned her hands on the keys with surprising confidence. I haven't played in many years, she warned. I will be rusty. When she began to play, Victoria's mouth fell open. Rosa's technique wasn't perfect. There were missed notes and hesitations. But there was a raw emotional quality to her playing that was mesmerizing. She played a folk melody Victoria didn't recognize, something bittersweet and haunting. When she finished, Rosa looked down at her hands. In my country, before the war, I studied at the conservatory. Music was my life, she shrugged. Then everything changed. Rosa, that was beautiful, Victoria said, genuinely moved. Why didn't you tell me you were a pianist? It was a different life, Rosa stood. I must finish my work now. Wait, Victoria said. Would you show me how you do that? How you put so much feeling into the music? Rosa seemed surprised by the request. You play much better than me, technically, but you play with soul. That's what I'm missing. Victoria hesitated. At least that's what Ethan says. Rosa studied her for a moment. Mr. Blackwood is right about some things, wrong about others. But yes, I can show you. Not today. I have other houses to clean after this. But tomorrow if you come early before the rest of the staff arrives. The next morning, Victoria arrived at the studio at 6, yawning but excited. Rosa was already there, not in her cleaning uniform but in simple jeans and a sweater. First, Rosa said, sitting at the piano, forget everything you know about playing correctly. Forget? Victoria blinked. I spent 15 years learning to play correctly. Exactly the problem. Rosa patted the bench beside her. Sit. Listen. For the next hour, Rosa showed Victoria how to approach music differently. Rather than focusing on technical perfection, she taught Victoria to connect with the emotions behind each piece. When I play this, Rosa demonstrated a mournful chord progression. I think of the day I left my home knowing I would never return. When I play this, she shifted to something lighter. I think of my grandson laughing. Victoria tried to follow Rosa's example, closing her eyes and thinking of her own memories. Her mother's tired smile after a long day of cleaning houses, the first time she had performed in public, the crushing disappointment of being rejected from a prestigious competition. Better, Rosa nodded when Victoria played a passage with more feeling. But you're still thinking too much. Music isn't in your head. It's here. She touched her heart. Over the next week, they established a routine. Early mornings with Rosa, learning to play with emotion. Days spent practicing alone, trying to incorporate what she had learned. Evenings performing for Ethan's guests, still providing background music but occasionally slipping in moments of the raw style Rosa had taught her. Ethan noticed. Victoria caught him watching her more intently during these moments, his conversation faltering as he listened. One evening, after the guests had gone, he approached the piano. You've been working with someone, he said. It wasn't a question. Victoria tensed. What makes you say that? Your playing has changed. Not consistently, but in moments. He leaned against the piano. Who is it? Victoria hesitated, not wanting to get Rosa in trouble. I've just been trying different approaches. Ethan studied her face, clearly not believing her. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Those moments when you let go, that's what I've been waiting to hear. The next morning, Victoria rushed to tell Rosa about Ethan's comment. He liked it, she said excitedly. He actually complimented me. Rosa smiled as she adjusted Victoria's hands on the keys. Mr. Blackwood appreciates beauty. This doesn't surprise me. But it's all because of you, Victoria insisted. You should be the one playing for his parties, not me. Rosa shook her head firmly. That life is behind me, but why? You're so talented. Rosa was quiet for a moment. Some wounds don't heal, Victoria. Music reminds me of too much loss. Then why help me? Because you still have joy in your music underneath all that perfect technique. Rosa gently moved Victoria's fingers to form a chord. Now play this like you're telling someone you love them for the first time. As weeks passed, Victoria's playing transformed. She began incorporating more of her own compositions into the evening performances, weaving them between classical pieces. The guests started to notice, conversations pausing as they listened. Victoria felt something awakening in her music that had been dormant for years. A sense of genuine expression rather than just technical display. One morning, Victoria arrived for her lesson with Rosa to find the studio empty. She waited, practicing the emotional techniques Rosa had taught her, but the older woman never appeared. Victoria searched the house, finally finding Patricia in the kitchen. Rosa, the cleaning woman? Patricia checked her tablet. She called in sick today. Oh, Victoria felt a pang of disappointment. Is she okay? Patricia shrugged, already moving on to other matters. Staff health isn't my department. She'll be back Friday, I assume. But Friday came and Rosa didn't. Victoria tried calling the number Rosa had given her, but there was no answer. A week passed with no word. You seem distracted, Ethan commented after a particularly uninspired performance. The party had ended and they were alone in the living room as usual. Victoria sighed. I'm sorry. I'm worried about someone. The person who's been teaching you? When Victoria looked surprised, Ethan smiled. I'm not blind, Victoria. Someone has been influencing your playing. And it's not a typical music teacher. After a moment of hesitation, Victoria told him about Rosa, her background as a conservatory pianist, her escape from war, her cleaning jobs, and now her mysterious absence. Ethan listened without interrupting. She works for me and I've never spoken to her, he said when Victoria finished. Never even noticed her. Most people don't notice cleaners, Victoria said, thinking of her mother. Ethan looked thoughtful. What's her last name? Navarro. Rosa Navarro. I'll find out what's happened to her, Ethan promised. The next day, Ethan found Victoria in the studio. Your friend Rosa is in the hospital. Her grandson fell and broke his arm, and while rushing him to emergency care, she collapsed. Apparently, she's been ignoring her own health problems for some time. Victoria's hand flew to her mouth. Is she okay? Stable, but they're keeping her for tests. Ethan handed Victoria a piece of paper. This is the hospital address. My driver can take you. Victoria looked at him in surprise. Thank you. Ethan seemed uncomfortable with her gratitude. Just be back by 7. I have the symphony board coming for dinner. At the hospital, Victoria found Rosa looking pale but alert, reading a book while her grandson slept in a chair beside her bed, his arm in a bright blue cast. Victoria! Rosa smiled weakly. You shouldn't have come. Of course I came. Victoria sat on the edge of the bed. What happened? High blood pressure, they say. Nothing serious, Rosa waved dismissively. Tomas fell at school and I was so worried I forgot my medication for a few days. Victoria looked at the sleeping boy. He'll be okay? Children heal quickly. Rosa's expression turned worried. But I cannot work for at least 2 weeks. The doctors insist. And without work? She didn't finish the sentence. Victoria squeezed her hand. Don't worry about that now. Just focus on getting better. She hesitated, then added, Ethan was concerned about you. He's the one who found out you were here. Rosa looked surprised. Mr. Blackwood? He doesn't even know who I am. He does now, Victoria said. That evening, Victoria played with a new depth of emotion, thinking of Rosa in the hospital bed, of her grandson's small face in sleep, of the precarious lives people lived while the wealthy dined on caviar and champagne. After the party, Ethan approached her. That was different tonight. Victoria nodded, too tired for their usual verbal sparring. I had a lot on my mind. How is she? She'll recover, but she's worried about money. She can't work for 2 weeks, maybe longer. Ethan was silent for a moment. I could use an assistant music teacher for the summer program I sponsor at the community center. The position comes with health insurance. Victoria stared at him. Are you offering Rosa a job? I'm offering her a better job, Ethan corrected. If she's half as good as your playing suggests, she's wasted as a cleaner. Victoria felt a surge of unexpected warmth toward him. Thank you. Ethan looked uncomfortable again. It's self-interested. I want to see what else she can teach you. He turned to leave, then paused. By the way, that original piece you played tonight? It moved me. As he walked away, Victoria sat stunned at the piano. In his own arrogant, complicated way, Ethan had just acknowledged that she had met his challenge. She had played something that moved him, but strangely his approval no longer seemed as important as it once had. What mattered more was that for the first time in years, Victoria felt truly connected to her music, and to the people it could touch. The summer heat settled over the coast like a warm blanket. As July turned to August, Victoria found herself caught in an unexpected rhythm. Mornings were spent at the community center, where Rosa now taught music to underprivileged children, with Victoria serving as her assistant. Afternoons were for composing and practicing at Ethan's estate. Evenings were still devoted to performances for his elite guests. But something fundamental had changed. People were listening now. "You played beautifully tonight," said an older woman Victoria recognized as the head of the city's arts council. "Such emotion in Chopin. And that original piece at the end, is it published?" Victoria shook her head, still unused to discussing her compositions. "No, it's just something I'm working on." "Well, you must let me know when it's available. I'd love to include it in our fall program." As the woman walked away, Victoria caught Ethan watching from across the room. He raised his glass slightly in acknowledgement before turning back to his conversation. These small moments of recognition had become more frequent between them. A nod, a brief comment, a shared glance when a guest said something particularly pretentious about music. Later that night, after the guests had departed, Ethan lingered by the piano as Victoria gathered her sheet music. "The children's concert at the community center is this Friday," she said, filling the silence. "Rosa has done amazing work with them, so I've heard." Ethan leaned against the piano. "My assistant says ticket sales have exceeded expectations." Victoria smiled. "You should come. Your donation made it possible, after all. I'm not particularly good with children." "They're not particularly good with music yet either," Victoria replied. "But they're learning. You might be surprised." Ethan studied her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You've changed since you came here." "My playing has improved, not just your playing." He shook his head. You're different, more what?" "Yourself," he finished simply. Victoria considered this. She did feel different, more confident, less concerned with perfection and others' approval. Working with Rosa and the children had reminded her why she fell in love with music in the first place. Not for acclaim or technical mastery, but for the pure joy of expression. "Is that a compliment?" she asked, echoing their earlier conversation. The corner of Ethan's mouth lifted. "It's an observation. Will you come to the concert?" she asked again. He hesitated, then nodded once. "I'll try." Friday arrived with chaotic energy. 20 children aged 6 to 12 bustled around the community center's small auditorium, clutching instruments and wearing the nicest clothes their families could manage. Some had proper violins or flutes, while others used instruments donated by Ethan's foundation. A few played makeshift percussion on whatever was available. Rosa moved among them with calm authority, adjusting a bow here, demonstrating finger placement there. Despite her recent health scare, she seemed more alive than Victoria had ever seen her, especially when working with Thomas, who followed his grandmother around with hero worship in his eyes. "Victoria, help Lily with her piano part," Rosa called over the din. "She's still rushing the middle section." Victoria sat with a serious 9-year-old at the upright piano in the corner. "Remember what we talked about? This part is like telling a secret. You have to slow down so people will listen carefully." Lily nodded, her face scrunched in concentration as she tried again, this time with more patience in her phrasing. "Perfect," Victoria smiled. "Just like that during the performance," Lily beamed. "Is your boyfriend coming to watch?" "My boyfriend?" Victoria blinked in confusion. "The rich man who owns the big house. Thomas says you live there." Victoria laughed. "Mr. Blackwood is my employer, not my boyfriend. And yes, he might come tonight. Thomas says he looks mean, but he's actually nice because he gave Grandma Rosa a job and paid for his cast." Lily wiggled her blue-polished fingers over the keys. "Is he mean?" Victoria considered how to answer. "He's uncomplicated, but he cares about music, just like you do." As the children took their places for a final rehearsal, Victoria spotted Rosa looking pale and leaning against the wall. "Are you okay?" Victoria asked quietly, moving to her side. Rosa nodded unconvincingly. "Just tired. There's so much to do before tonight." "Sit down," Victoria insisted. "I'll handle the rest of rehearsal." Rosa reluctantly took a seat, pressing a hand to her chest. The doctor said not to overexert, but these children will be fine, Victoria assured her. You've prepared them well. As Victoria led the final rehearsal, she marveled at how natural it felt to guide these young musicians. A year ago, she would have been frustrated by their mistakes and limitations. Now she found joy in their enthusiasm, in the moments when a child's face lit up after playing a difficult passage correctly. By 6 o'clock, parents and community members began filing into the auditorium. Victoria scanned the growing crowd for Ethan but didn't see him. She told herself it didn't matter. He was busy after all, but couldn't help feeling disappointed. At 6:30, with the seats nearly full, Victoria prepared to start without him. She approached the microphone to welcome everyone when the doors at the back opened. Ethan walked in, looking distinctly uncomfortable in such humble surroundings. He wasn't alone. Behind him came Patricia and several well-dressed people Victoria recognized from his dinner parties, board members of the symphony, arts patrons and music critics. Rosa appeared at Victoria's side, her eyes wide. Is that the cultural editor from the newspaper? Victoria nodded, equally surprised. Ethan brought reinforcements. The concert was far from perfect. Notes were missed, tempos wavered, and one young violinist got so nervous he had to start his solo 3 times. But there was an honesty to the performance that touched everyone in the room. These children played with their whole hearts, and it showed. When Thomas took his place at the piano for the final piece, Victoria held her breath. He was playing a simplified version of the folk melody his grandmother had taught Victoria, the one that had started their unusual friendship. His small fingers moved carefully over the keys, his broken arm making his posture awkward, but the melody rang true. Victoria glanced at Rosa and saw tears in her eyes. Then she looked to where Ethan sat in the back row. He was leaning forward slightly, his usual mask of indifference gone, replaced by genuine attention. After thunderous applause and many tearful hugs, the children dispersed with their families. Victoria was helping to stack chairs when Ethan approached with his entourage. The foundation will be increasing its funding for next year's program, he announced without preamble. Georgia from the Symphony Board has offered to provide professional mentors for the more advanced students. Victoria blinked in surprise. That's wonderful. And the newspaper would like to do a feature on Ms. Navarro's teaching methods, added a stern-looking woman with a press badge, focusing on how she brings emotional authenticity to classical training. Rosa, who had been quietly putting away sheet music, looked up in shock. Me? But I'm just a gifted teacher who deserves recognition, Ethan finished firmly. My assistant will coordinate everything. As the group moved away to discuss details with the community center director, Victoria turned to Ethan. Thank you, she said simply. He shrugged. The program has merit. The funding makes sense. Is that all this is? A logical investment? Ethan was quiet for a moment. The boy at the piano, Thomas. He played that piece like he understood loss. He does, Victoria said softly. Thanks to his grandmother. Yes, Ethan nodded. That's what I've been trying to explain to you all summer. Understanding isn't enough. You have to have lived it. Before Victoria could respond, one of the symphony board members called Ethan over. He excused himself, leaving Victoria to wonder at the layers beneath his polished surface. Later that night, back at the estate, Victoria couldn't sleep. The evening had been too full of emotions and surprises. She made her way to the studio, intending to play quietly for herself. She froze in the doorway. Ethan sat at the piano in the darkness, a single lamp casting his shadow across the floor. He wasn't playing, just sitting with his hands hovering over the keys. Victoria started to back away, but the floorboard creaked. Ethan looked up. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't know you were here. I couldn't sleep. He didn't move from the bench. I keep hearing that boy's playing in my head. Victoria stepped into the room. Tomas is special. It's not just talent, Ethan said, his voice unusually reflective. It's the way he plays, like he's having a conversation with someone who isn't there. Victoria moved closer. Rosa says he plays for his grandfather. He died during their escape. Ethan nodded slowly. I used to play like that. A long time ago, you play? Victoria couldn't hide her surprise. A humorless smile crossed his face. 12 years of lessons. I was considered quite promising. What happened? Ethan's fingers pressed down silently on the keys. Life happened. Business happened. Eventually, I stopped making time for it. But you still love music, Victoria said. That's why you have musicians play here. I appreciate talent, he corrected. It's not the same as having it. Victoria sat beside him on the bench, not too close. Show me. Ethan looked at her, startled. What? Play something, anything. I haven't played in years. Then it's time to start again, Victoria said simply. For a moment, she thought he would refuse. Then his hands settled on the keys and he began to play. It was a simple piece, something a talented student might learn. Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, first movement. His technique was rusty but fundamentally sound. What surprised Victoria was the melancholy beauty he brought to the familiar notes. When he finished, neither spoke for a long moment. You could play again, you know, Victoria finally said. It's never too late. Ethan shook his head. Some things you can't get back. Like what? He turned to look at her, his usual defenses gone. The person I was when music mattered more than money. Victoria felt something shift between them, a new understanding. For all his wealth and arrogance, Ethan was searching for something he had lost, just as she had been searching for something she had never quite found. Maybe, she said gently, that person is still there, just waiting for the right moment to play again. The final weeks of summer brought a gentle shift in the atmosphere at Ethan's estate. After their late-night encounter at the piano, something had changed between Victoria and Ethan. The mocking challenges and defensive responses gave way to a quieter, more thoughtful relationship. They weren't exactly friends. The employer-employee dynamic remained. But there was a new respect that hadn't existed before. One morning, Victoria arrived at the studio to find a stack of sheet music on the piano, handwritten compositions yellowed with age. A note in Ethan's precise handwriting read simply, "Found these in storage. Perhaps you can make something of them." Victoria spent hours exploring Ethan's old compositions. They were surprisingly good, technically complex, but with an emotional openness she hadn't associated with him. Some were dated from his college years, others from his early 20s before, she assumed, the business world had consumed him. Later that day, she found him in his home office, surrounded by screens displaying financial data. "Thank you for sharing your music," she said from the doorway. "It's beautiful." Ethan looked up, his expression guarded. "They're just old exercises. They're more than that." Victoria stepped into the room. "Especially the nocturne dated July 2009. There's something special about that one." A shadow crossed Ethan's face. "I wrote that the week my father died," Victoria nodded. "I could feel it. The grief comes through in every note." He turned back to his screens. "Feel free to use any of them. They're just gathering dust otherwise." "Actually," Victoria said, "I was wondering if you'd consider playing the nocturne at the benefit concert next month." Ethan's head snapped up. "What?" "The benefit for the community music program. You're hosting it here, remember? Rosa and I thought it would be meaningful if you played something too." "Absolutely not." His voice was firm. "I haven't performed in public since college." "It's not a performance," Victoria pressed. "It's sharing something personal with people who care about music as much as you do." When he remained silent, she added, "Just think about it." Planning for the benefit consumed the next few weeks. Ethan had offered his oceanside garden as the venue, and invitations went out to his wealthy circle, as well as to the families from the community program. The goal was to raise enough money to expand Rosa's teaching to more children and to provide better instruments. Victoria worked closely with Rosa, who had recovered her strength and now glowed with purpose. They selected music for the children to perform and practice daily. Victoria also prepared her own piece, a new composition that combined elements of classical structure with the emotional freedom Rosa had taught her. Ethan remained non-committal about performing but began spending more time in the studio late at night. Victoria occasionally heard him playing when she passed by, always his father's nocturne over and over, each time with subtle differences as he reconnected with the piece. A week before the benefit, disaster struck. Rosa called Victoria early in the morning, her voice tight with distress. "I'm at the hospital with Tomas. He has pneumonia." Victoria rushed to the hospital to find Rosa slumped in a chair beside Tomas's bed. The boy looked small and pale, his breathing labored despite the oxygen mask. The doctor says he'll recover, Rosa said, rubbing her eyes, but not in time for the benefit. And I can't leave him. Of course you can't, Victoria assured her. The benefit doesn't matter. Thomas comes first. But when Victoria returned to the estate and told Ethan the news, she was surprised by his reaction. Postponing isn't an option, he said firmly. We have major donors flying in. The symphony board has committed. The press is covering it. Rosa can't be there, Victoria explained again, and she's the heart of this program. Ethan paced the length of his office. Then you'll have to take her place. Me? I can't replace Rosa. You've been working with her for months. You know her methods, her vision. He stopped pacing and faced her. You can do this, Victoria. The certainty in his voice gave her pause. When had Ethan Blackwood, who once mockingly proposed marriage if she could move him with her playing, become someone who believed in her abilities? The day of the benefit arrived clear and warm. The garden was transformed with elegant chairs arranged in rows facing a temporary stage. A grand piano gleamed in the center, surrounded by smaller chairs for the children's ensemble. As guests began to arrive, wealthy patrons in designer clothes mingling with families from the community center, Victoria watched from the house, her stomach in knots. She had spent the past week working intensely with the children, trying to channel Rosa's teaching while adding her own perspective. They're ready, said a voice behind her. Ethan stood in the doorway, dressed in a dark suit that made him look both powerful and somehow vulnerable. And so are you. Victoria smoothed her simple blue dress, not one of the gowns Ethan had provided, but one she had chosen herself. I just wish Rosa could be here. She'll see the video, Ethan said. My team is recording everything. As they walked toward the garden, Victoria asked the question she'd been avoiding. Did you decide? About playing the nocturne? Ethan was quiet for a moment. I don't know if I can. Victoria stopped and turned to him. When we first met, you challenged me to play something that would move you. You said I was technically perfect, but emotionally empty. I was cruel, Ethan admitted. You were right, Victoria countered. And now I'm challenging you. Play something real, something that matters. Before he could respond, they were interrupted by the event coordinator announcing it was time to begin. The benefit unfolded beautifully. The children, despite missing Tomas and Rosa, played with heart and enthusiasm. Victoria guided them through their pieces, then performed her own composition. A musical journey that traced her evolution from technically proficient to emotionally connected. When she finished, the applause was immediate and genuine. Victoria looked out at the audience and saw something she hadn't expected. People wiping away tears, reaching for each other's hands, genuinely moved by what they had heard. As the applause faded, Victoria approached the microphone. Music has the power to bridge worlds, she said. It connects people who might otherwise never understand each other. Today we're raising money for instruments and lessons, but what we're really supporting is connection between different communities. Different generations, different lives, she paused, gathering her courage. Our next piece was composed by someone who once thought music was less important than success. He wrote it during a time of personal loss, and today he's going to share it with us for the first time. Victoria turned toward the house, not knowing if Ethan would appear. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the glass doors opened, and Ethan walked slowly toward the piano. The audience murmured in surprise as he took his seat, adjusted the bench, and placed his hands on the keys. He began to play his father's nocturne. The piece started softly, almost hesitantly, like someone testing whether they remembered how to speak a language. Then it grew, building in complexity and emotion until it filled the garden with a sound so raw and honest that Victoria felt tears on her cheeks. When the final notes faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then applause erupted. Not polite cocktail party applause, but the kind that comes from genuine appreciation. Ethan stood looking slightly dazed and bowed awkwardly. As the event continued with drinks and fundraising, Victoria found herself beside Ethan near the edge of the garden, looking out over the ocean. Thank you, she said simply. For what? For playing. For being brave enough to share that part of yourself. Ethan's gaze remained on the horizon. I'd forgotten what it felt like. To play for others, not just for myself. And, Victoria prompted, a small smile appeared. It felt like coming home after a very long trip. Their conversation was interrupted by the event coordinator. who approached with an excited expression. "Mr. Blackwood, we've exceeded the fundraising goal by more than double, and the Symphony Board wants to discuss an ongoing partnership with the community program." After she left, Victoria smiled. "Rosa will be thrilled." "Speaking of Rosa," Ethan said, "I had an idea I wanted to run by you." 2 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Victoria stood in the lobby of the city's concert hall, watching people stream in for the opening night of the new season. Beside her, Rosa adjusted Thomas's bow tie. The boy had fully recovered and was bouncing with excitement. "Do I really get to turn the pages for Mr. Ethan?" he asked for the 10th time. "Yes," Rosa assured him, "but only if you stay calm and follow his cues just like we practiced." Victoria checked her watch. "We should take our seats. It's almost time." They found their places in the front row just as the lights dimmed. The conductor appeared to enthusiastic applause, followed by the evening's featured soloist, Ethan Blackwood. The program notes explained that this was Ethan's first public performance in over a decade, and that all proceeds from the concert would support the newly established Blackwood Navarro Music Foundation, dedicated to bringing music education to underserved communities. As Ethan took his place at the piano, with Thomas sitting carefully on the bench beside him to turn pages, Victoria felt a warmth spread through her chest. The arrogant millionaire who had once laughingly offered to marry her if she could move him with her playing had become someone entirely different, or perhaps had simply remembered who he truly was. Ethan began to play not his father's nocturne, but a new composition titled simply 3 Lives. Victoria recognized elements of her own playing style in some passages, Rosa's emotional depth in others, and throughout Ethan's distinctive voice, no longer buried under years of neglect. Halfway through, Ethan glanced briefly toward the front row. His eyes met Victoria's, and in that moment of connection, she understood what Rosa had been teaching them both all along, that music, like life, isn't about technical perfection or wealth or status. It's about honest expression, about sharing who you are with others. It's about playing from the heart.